to be slow going. Don't be rubbernecking as you drive by either.
Well, the first time I met Kent was at his dad and mom's auto shop, which was in Paducah on Broadway, right down from the old Jack Wilson Chevrolet. And I went in there, and Kent was behind the counter. We had just put on WKYQ about a year before, and he had mentioned to me, this 18-year-old, that he loved the Q and country music. And I thought that that was highly unusual for a teenager in the 70s to think that country music was cool. Teenagers did not think country music was cool, or if they did, they didn't admit it to anybody. So right there on the spot, I loved his enthusiasm and his belief in this brand new radio station at that time. And so I hired him right on the spot and said, Kent, there's something we'll be doing with you. I'll be back to you. So Kent came on with us, and he has been instrumental in the success of 93.3 through the years, especially in those beginning years with Terry Schmitt. Without these guys, the success of the Q would have never happened. And then on a personal basis, through the years, Kent has been so encouraging to me. He's such an optimistic individual, and through some really valleys in my life, Kent has come in and to my office and said, Gary, you're going to do it, you're going to make it. And I could tell he really had confidence in me, and that really bolstered my spirit and helped get me through some low moments.
Everyone in this area owes a huge debt to Kent because of his tireless dedication as Director of Office of Emergency Management. At the radio station, our debt is more personal. Kent was the foundation that built that radio station, the Q, into what it was, and he passed those qualities on to us. Kent understood that a radio station should be a real part of the community, that you invite us into your kitchens in the morning, into your car on the way home, into your cookouts on the weekend. And there's a responsibility that goes with that. What's important to you should be important to us. Kent taught us that respect, and he taught us the responsibility of being on the air, that you've invited us in, and we have a certain responsibility for that. Kent also taught us that it should be fun, and Kent was more fun than any man I've ever worked for. He hired me in 1986. He hired Dr. Jeff, Donna Groves, Bobby, and Steve. He hired a lot of people, and he taught us all a lot of things. We owe him so much for our careers and just the privilege of having known him. Kent was always very positive and always very encouraging, and he knew how to build a person's strengths without attacking his weaknesses. Kent was one of the most positive people I think I've ever met. Always very, very encouraging, always had a kind word, and gave us the freedom to try things and succeed on our own. If it failed, he would help us figure out why it didn't work and make it better the next time. And when it did succeed, he was more excited than we were. At the radio station, we all owe him a huge debt, and the only way we can repay it is to pass it on to others. And we will miss you, Kent, terribly.
This is Kent Kreider, former WKYQ crew member and Outlaw Hour host. And when I think about Kent King, I have to think about the first night that I met Kent. He was with Terry Schmitt, and I had listened to him on the radio mornings. I worked at a factory in Marion, Kentucky, and loved the Q and loved listening to Kent and all the guys on the Q. And I begged him to somehow find a way to let me do something on the radio, part-time or whatever. And so they agreed to let me come out and take a tour of the station. And after I found out where the station was, I didn't know where it was, but when I found out, then on Saturdays when I was off from the factory, I would drive to Paducah and take Kent breakfast or lunch, depending on what shift he worked that particular weekend. And while he ate his food and maybe took a break afterward, he would let me run the control board. So he's the one that actually let me run the WKYQ control board first and taught me things about radio. He taught me so many things. We had so many great chats. I remember the night that Waylon Jennings died. We talked on the phone for a good while and talked about how we were getting older then, and he compared us to the guys in the movie Space Cowboys, and we had a good laugh about that. But, you know, out of all the people I've met in my life, I know Kent King was always one that could take whatever came along. and he could deal with whatever happened. And I'm sure he's looking down on us today. He has everything under control, and I'm sure he's happy, and we'll get to see him again one day. And Kent King, thank you, love you, miss you.
Ken and I first met back around 1974 in the Kicks Broadcasting Club. Shortly thereafter, he got a job with WKYQ. Shortly after that, he gave me a job at WKYQ. And Ken had an absolutely true love for radio. And one of the things that Kent worked so hard on was to make the Outlaw Hours happen. It wasn't real easy back in those days, but Kent worked really, really hard to make the Outlaw Hours happen. But one of my most fondest memories of Kent was around 1979, him and Terry Hale, who worked at the radio station at the same time, wanted to be volunteer firemen. And they found out there was a meeting on a Tuesday night for volunteer firemen in McCracken County. I believe it was at Hendron. So they're all excited about that. And I think Kent had gone as far as checking into getting lights for his car. So that Tuesday night comes, and they go to this meeting, and later on that evening they come into the radio station, and Kent really had his head down. And, you know, Kent was always such an upbeat person, was happy and everything, but he was really down and like, Kent, what's wrong? They wouldn't let him be a volunteer fireman because he, at that time, lived in the city, and he had to be a resident of the county. But that was one of the first efforts Ken had made to be a volunteer and to be a public servant, and he truly lived his life for public service in this community.
Well, of course, I've been around Kent at the station and a lot on the news scenes out at Rex and things like that. I wanted to share a few funny stories with you, though. One morning I came into work, and Kent worked early mornings for a long time, and I was very upset. I'm a big animal lover, and I had run over a rabbit on the way into work, and I was very upset about that. And Kent had a lot of strange conspiracy type theories about some things, and Kent very immediately came in with this deadpan, straight right out of the box. "You don't need to be upset about having run over the rabbit, Donna," he said. "Rabbits have nothing to live for. They wait for that tire and try to time it because they're all suicidal. They want out of this life. You shouldn't feel bad about that at all. You should feel grateful that you took that rabbit out. That's what he wanted." So I wasn't so worried about the rabbit at that point as I was about Kent, but that was just the way Kent was. And I also have this thing about animals, and Kent would give me a hard time about it from time to time. Being a softie, you know, he would tease me about that. But from time to time, I would see that we weren't so far apart on that as what he would have me to believe. One time there was a big flood out in the High Point area, and I saw a kitten out on a doghouse, and I was pointing it out to Kent, and he was telling me in his gruff voice that he was busy. And I kept pointing out the cat. Well, the next morning when I saw Kent, he made sure to make sure Donna knows, "I got the cat. He's at my house." So we weren't that far apart on the animal issue. I think the cat lived out the rest of his life at Kent's house. I'll miss him.